Welcome back everybody to another MOTOBOB video, and today some really quite interesting spy shots have graced my inbox in the form of what looks like a significant update to Yamaha's super popular adventure bike, the Tenere 700. And thing is, it has been quite a while since this bike was first released in 2019, and they haven't really made any particularly major updates to it since. And in the meantime, the competition, it has to be said, have really all upped their game. So what have Yamaha changed, and is it really going to be enough to keep the T7 competitive for the next 5 years? Well, in this video, we're going to have a good look at these spy shots as well as everything that we can pick out from them so far. Now, first up, clearly there's a bit of a visual redesign going on here. So you've got a tight fabric stretched over the fairing to sort of obscure its shape. And while I don't think there necessarily needed to be a huge change to it, because the current T7 has aged pretty well and still looks good after 5 years, you know, with the handguards on show here and the belly pan, we can pick out some new shapes and lines, and so I'd expect that across the board with new bodywork. Generally, the underpinnings are going to be quite similar though. You can see the chassis isn't a million miles off. In fact, a lot of it looks identical. And so really this is going to be an evolution of the current bike, just with a little more modernity and slightly sharper lines perhaps. Now, a big part of how a bike looks is of course the headlight. It gives it a bit of a face. And again, I absolutely love the look of the current generation with those quad LEDs that give it a bit of that rally aesthetic. It seems like this one though will bring that general idea just a little more up to date, because you can make out from the pictures that we've got these more squared off rectangular lighting elements as opposed to the round LEDs of the current gen. There's also a bit of a downward V visible in the surround around the headlight, and so maybe it's going to look a little bit more aggressive, but ultimately it won't be a million miles off the current bike, just like the bodywork change, and rightly so in my opinion. It's a great looking bike, still one of the best looking middleweight adventure bikes, and so there's absolutely no need to start from the ground up. As for the engine, well, of course, all the Tenere 700s use their 689cc CP2 parallel twin, which it has to be said is a solid performer across a whole bunch of bikes for Yamaha. And with that, you get about 72 horsepower peak and 68 Nm of peak torque. Now, reasonable figures for a middleweight, and certainly sort of 5 years ago, you'd have thought they were pretty acceptable. But I will say this is one area in which the competition really have started to outperform Yamaha. Now, one could argue with the Tenere 700 that it's one of the most off-road biased middleweight adventure bikes currently on the market, and so if you are predominantly riding off-road, then 72 horsepower is realistically more than enough. But on the other hand, you know, horsepower figures do help to sell bikes, especially when it comes to road use, and so it might be a bit of a disappointment if they don't update it with this iteration. Thing is, the exhaust headers, the engine cases that we can see, even the silencer as well, they all look pretty similar, and so I've got to say, I'm not really expecting a huge hike in power. So the question for you guys down in the comments is whether 72 horsepower is enough, or do they really need to bump it up? Now, another area in which the T7, it has to be said, does lag a little bit behind the competition is with the technology package, which is really very simple. They did update it with a TFT display a couple of years back, but other than that, you know, there are no riding modes because it's still got a traditional cable throttle, no traction control either, and so really in terms of gizmos to play with, you've just got switchable ABS. Thing is though, looking at these pictures, there isn't a super clean picture of the throttle, but from this one under the rider's arm, you can see there is what looks like a really quite different switchgear to me on the right hand grip there, and also the grip seems to sit pretty flush against it from this angle, which wouldn't leave the space for the traditional throttle cables that you'll get on the current generation. Now, this would be huge news if they did update it with a ride-by-wire throttle. Like I say, that opens up so many features like different riding modes and throttle maps, traction control, potentially even something like cruise control. And given how many bikes use this CP2 engine, this could have a wide-ranging impact across their whole middleweight lineup. Now, I know some people really do value the sort of simplicity and robustness of the Tenere 700 and almost think that the simpler the bike is, the better. But it has to be said, I think this would be a big improvement, and certainly if you're shopping against some of the competition, it would bring it up to where you'd expect at this sort of performance level and price point. Now all that stuff would be managed through the TFT display that I mentioned earlier that came out on this bike a couple of years back, and from the pictures here of what we can see of the cockpit, it does look to be the same as the current generation, which is full color, nicely laid out, and also in that vertical orientation, which gives it even more of that sort of rally vibe. Personally, I'm a big fan of it. I've ridden a few variants of this bike that do use this TFT display, and so for me, I'm absolutely glad they're keeping it. Now this is also a perfect chance to give a shout out to today's video sponsor, and that's Spied, because you see, scratching or damaging the display on your bike could cost hundreds if not thousands to replace. Even the simple LCD display that predated this TFT on the Tenere, that's almost 600 quid to replace. And thing is, you can't just replace the glass over the front, you have to buy the entire assembly. Spied dash protectors, though, they cost just a few quid, and they make them for most new bikes from all the major manufacturers, and they gave us a 20% discount code specifically for our viewers, which you can find down in the description below, along with a link to their website. So once again, a massive thanks to Spied for their support, and with that, back to the Tenere. Now the T7 at the moment is available in a few different variants, some of them with the regular 16-litre fuel tank, whilst the World Raid and the World Rally come with a much bigger 23-litre tank with this sort of split design that hangs fairly low at either side. Now with these spy shots, it does look very wide from the front, this bike, even though it's covered up with that fabric, and also the side panels just look a little bit too beefy and chunky to be that standard 16-litre tank, and they do come way down to almost meet the skid plate, and so I think this must be one of the large tank variants. Elsewhere on the internet though, with these spy shots, obviously they go out to multiple outlets. They've been saying there are new air intakes or inlets between the radiator and the sort of side panels, and that these could be part of a revised airbox for a new tune for this engine, but to be honest, I think that's absolute tosh. You see, the World Raid and World Rally already have these, and I think they're just there to let a bit of air through owing to that bigger tank, which is of course going to keep you a little bit on the warm side, especially when you're riding in warmer conditions. Now I don't have a World Raid or World Rally here in the studio to check that, but if you do, let me know down in the comments. I think they're just little air vents. Elsewhere, from a chassis perspective as well, it looks very similar to the current generation, so you can see stuff like the swing arm, if you put it side by side with the current bike, is absolutely the same. You've got the 21-inch front wheel and 18-incher at the rear, both spoked, which of course are great for off-roading. Personally, I think it'd be great if they updated them with tubeless rims. For the majority of riders, I think that's going to be better. And also, you do get that on a lot of the competition now, but it looks like they're pretty much the same as the current gen, so get used to changing tubes. And then also up front, we've got the 2-piston Brembo brakes on the little pedal discs, and a suspension setup which doesn't look a million miles off either. The only thing that really does look different is that rear suspension linkage with some much longer arms visible under the bike there. Now motorrad.de got hold of these pics pretty early, and they're reporting that the current bike bottoms out a little bit too easily, either if it's fully loaded up with luggage and a passenger, or even if you're riding solo, but you know, with big impacts that come from more intense off-road riding. So they speculate that this is a revised progressive linkage with the ability to better deal with those big hits when it gets towards the bottom of the stroke, but also while still preserving a bit of the comfort and control in the initial part of the suspension's travel. Now you can also see a lot of that camouflage sort of fabric running along the side panels and then up over the seat, and so it could just be to cover up some new visual designs for the side panels, or maybe you could also have a couple of changes here to the saddle itself. I will say the most recent Tenere that we've reviewed is the T7 Explore, which is a accessorized and lowered version, which is meant to be slightly better for road riding, and I will say the bigger windscreen, the luggage options, the quick shifter do all make for a bit of a better road bike. But ultimately, you still really feel like you're riding a big dirt bike. That's how it handles, that's how it feels to sit on as well. And a big part of that is the saddle, which is very long and also very slim. It doesn't give you that bucket of support that you get on some other adventure bikes, and certainly the bigger adventure bikes like the GS or the Tiger 1200. So maybe this is covering up a bit of a tweak to the saddle, and I would say that that would be quite welcome to have something a little more distance orientated, at least just as an option if you do want to ride this bike more so on the road. But look, I'd love to know what you think of this update down in the comments below. It doesn't look like a huge overhaul, and so could it really be enough to keep this bike up there with the default recommendations and sort of shortlist contenders in the middleweight adventure segment. You know, especially considering that the base Tenere 700 is up over £10,000 now, and you've got some great options in that sort of price range like the Suzuki V-Strom 800DE, the Honda Transalp, the KTM 790 Adventure, and of course the Touareg 660 from Aprilia. So yeah, let me know what you think of it and what else you'd like to see from this update potentially. And also, if you like the look of the current generation Tenere 700 but you're not quite sure which of those many variants that are available you should go for, then fortunately we've got a complete guide on the screen now which will tell you which sort of rider each version is best for, and so do give it a click and give it a watch if you haven't already. Also hit subscribe if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on YouTube. Many thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.